Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. I told him to sleep on the couch that night. It wasn't supposed to mean anything, just a boundary, a line I drew because I thought it was safer that way. The air was cold, the rain outside tapping against the window, and the silence between us said more than words ever could. He looked at me for a moment before nodding, that quiet, respectful kind of nod that makes you feel both relieved and confused at the same time. I thought that was it. I thought I'd wake up alone, the way I always do. But I was wrong. He wasn't supposed to cross that line. Not that night. Not after everything that had been said. But when I woke up in the dark, I felt the bed dip slightly, the warmth of another presence slowly spreading across the sheets. My heart raced before my eyes even opened. I didn't move, didn't speak. I just listened to the soft rhythm of his breathing, to the storm outside, to my own heartbeat pounding against my chest. It's strange how something so small, like the sound of someone quietly shifting closer, can change everything. Part of me wanted to turn and ask what he was doing. Another part wanted to stay perfectly still, pretending it wasn't happening. Maybe I was scared of what he'd say, or what I might feel if he did. Earlier that evening, we'd fought, nothing serious, just one of those conversations that feel heavier than they should. He said I was always pushing people away. I said he was reading too much into things. Maybe we were both right. Maybe we were both hiding something we didn't want to admit. The truth is, we'd been dancing around this invisible line for weeks, pretending not to notice the tension that filled every pause, every glance, every almost touch. When he first moved in for a few days, just until he found his own place, I didn't think twice about it. He was a friend, someone I trusted, someone who made me laugh when I needed it most. But somewhere between late-night talks and quiet breakfasts, something shifted. It wasn't supposed to be romantic, yet the silence between us started to feel charged, and now, here we were. I could feel the warmth of his arm brushing lightly against mine, his breath close enough that I could tell he wasn't asleep. Neither of us said a word. Maybe we were both waiting for the other to make a move, to decide whether this was a mistake or something else entirely. Have you ever felt that moment when everything could change with just one word? When silence feels louder than thunder? I lay there wondering, should I tell him to go back to the couch, or should I just let the night take its course? What would you have done if you were in my place? Would you have drawn the line again, or let it blur? Tell me in the comments, I really want to know. And if you think you already know how this night ends, you might be wrong. Because what happened next is something I never saw coming. The morning after felt different, like the air inside the house carried something unspoken. Sunlight slipped through the blinds, touching the edge of the blanket that somehow ended up tangled between us. He was already awake, lying still, staring at the ceiling like he was trying to figure out how last night even happened. I wanted to say something, to ask why he came into my bed when I told him not to, but the words never found their way out. He finally sat up, running his hand through his messy hair, and said softly, "Sorry. I didn't mean to make things weird." I just nodded, pretending it wasn't a big deal, even though my heart was still caught between confusion and something else I didn't want to name. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was something warmer, something that scared me more than either. We both got up and moved through the morning like strangers. He made coffee. I cooked breakfast. The silence between us was thick, full of everything we didn't say. Every time our eyes met, we both looked away too quickly. I caught myself thinking about the night before, how quietly he'd moved, how close he'd been. It shouldn't have meant anything. But it did. A few days later, things started to feel almost normal again. We talked more, laughed a little, tried to forget that strange night. But once something shifts, you can't really go back to how it was. Every moment felt like it was hiding something underneath, a question, a possibility, a memory neither of us could erase. One evening, while we were cleaning up after dinner, he said, "You've been different lately." I asked what he meant, and he just shrugged, smiling a little. "I don't know, maybe you're quieter. Or maybe I'm just noticing things now." His voice was calm, but there was a hint of something deeper behind it. I wanted to ask what he noticed, but instead, I just smiled and changed the subject. The truth was, I was different. I caught myself waiting for him to come home, listening for the sound of his footsteps in the hallway. I hated that I cared that much. I'd told myself so many times not to get attached. He was supposed to be temporary. Just someone passing through. But somehow, he'd found his way into every part of my routine, and maybe even a part of me. That night, as I walked past the couch where he usually slept, I saw him looking at me, the same quiet expression he had that first night. For a moment, neither of us moved. The room felt heavy again, charged with the same tension I thought had faded. He opened his mouth like he was about to say something, but stopped. I waited, but the words never came. Maybe he was thinking the same thing I was. That sometimes, the things we don't say speak louder than anything we could ever confess. The days that followed felt like walking on a line that kept getting thinner. We never talked about that night, but it lived quietly between us, like a secret neither of us wanted to admit existed. Sometimes, I'd catch him watching me from across the room, eyes filled with questions he never asked. And sometimes, I found myself doing the same, pretending I wasn't waiting for him to look back. But then something changed. One evening, his phone rang while he was in the kitchen, and I saw the name flash across the screen, a woman's name I didn't recognize. He answered quickly, voice softer than usual, almost careful. I wasn't trying to listen, but the tone caught me off guard. There was a laugh, hers or his, I couldn't tell. When he came back, he looked different, lighter somehow, like something had shifted inside him. I didn't ask who it was, but I wanted to. Instead, I just smiled like it didn't matter, though my chest felt tight. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was reading too much into everything. But part of me knew something was changing. Later that night, I found him sitting on the porch, looking out at the rain. He said quietly, "You ever feel like you're stuck between what's right and what you really want?" I didn't know how to answer. I wanted to tell him that I knew exactly what that felt like, but instead, I just said, "All the time." He nodded, and for a moment, it felt like he wanted to say more. But he didn't. He just sat there, staring into the dark, while I stood by the door wondering if I should join him, or walk away before it got harder. The house started to feel smaller after that. The silence between us wasn't peaceful anymore, it was full of questions, full of almost confessions. Every glance, every accidental touch felt heavier than it should. I tried to act normal, but every time he walked by, the air seemed to shift. One evening, I overheard him on the phone again. This time, he said, "No, I haven't told her yet." My heart froze. Her? Who was she? What hadn't he told me? When he saw me standing there, he quickly ended the call, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Something inside me cracked a little. I wanted to ask what was going on, but the fear of the answer stopped me. Maybe he had someone waiting for him. Maybe I was just a stop along the way. Now I'm left wondering, was that night just a moment of weakness, or did it mean something more? That night, the air in the house felt heavier than usual, like every wall was holding its breath. He barely spoke through dinner, eyes distant, hands restless. I could tell something was weighing on him, but I didn't know if it was guilt, confusion, or something else entirely. The silence between us had grown so loud that even the smallest sound, a fork tapping the plate, the ticking of the clock, felt sharp enough to cut through the air. When he finally looked at me, His eyes said everything his mouth refused to. "We need to talk," he said quietly. My stomach tightened, and I could feel the words I'd been avoiding rising in my throat. I wanted to tell him that I already knew something was wrong. That I'd seen the calls, the late-night texts, the shift in the way he smiled. But all I could manage was a nod. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, the same couch where I told him to sleep that first night. The irony wasn't lost on me. He took a deep breath and started, "There's something I should have told you earlier." I braced myself, every heartbeat echoing louder in my ears. But before he could continue, his phone rang again. That same name flashed across the screen. He hesitated, then declined the call. The look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. Whoever she wasn't going away. The storm outside grew stronger, wind pressing against the windows as if the world itself was trying to interrupt us. He stood up, pacing slowly, searching for words that wouldn't come. "It's not what you think," he finally said. But his voice cracked halfway through the sentence, and that was all it took for my chest to tighten. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just asked one question. "Then what is it?" He didn't answer. He just stared at me, torn between explaining and escaping. And that silence, again, felt heavier than any truth he could have said. Hours passed like minutes. He went outside, standing in the rain without an umbrella, while I watched from the window. He looked lost, like someone trying to find the right version of himself to be honest with. For the first time, I didn't want to stop him. Maybe he needed to face whatever it was. Maybe we both did. When he finally came back inside, dripping wet, his voice was quiet but certain. "There's something you don't know," he said, his gaze steady. "And it might change everything." The words hung in the air, unfinished, electric. My breath caught as I waited for him to go on, but he didn't. For a long moment, neither of us moved. His words, "There's something you don't know," hung between us like smoke that refused to fade. The only sound in the room was the faint dripping of rain from his hair onto the floor. My chest felt tight, my mind spinning with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answers to. He looked different now, like he was carrying a truth that had been waiting too long to be told. Finally, I said, "Then tell me." My voice was steadier than I felt. He ran his hand through his hair, exhaling slowly before sitting down again. "Remember when I said I'd be staying here just for a few days?" he began. I nodded. That wasn't completely true. He paused, eyes meeting mine. I didn't have anywhere else to go. I was trying to get away from someone. The words hit harder than I expected. From someone? I couldn't tell if I was more curious or afraid to hear the rest. He hesitated before continuing, "Her name's Claire. We were together, but things got complicated. She didn't take the breakup well." His voice dropped lower. "She's been calling, showing up places, trying to find me." A cold chill ran through me. So the woman calling wasn't just anyone, she was part of the story he'd been running from. Suddenly, the phone calls, the tension, the sleepless nights, they all started to make sense. "You should have told me," I said quietly. "I know," he replied, his voice almost breaking. "I didn't want to drag you into it. I thought if I stayed quiet, she'd stop. But she hasn't." Before I could respond, there was a knock on the door. 3 short taps, sharp, deliberate. We both froze. My heartbeat quickened, and he turned pale. Without a word, he moved closer to the door, peeking through the window. Then he stepped back, eyes wide. "It's her," he whispered. I didn't know what to say. My stomach dropped as the knocking came again, louder this time. "Are you going to open it?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not yet." His voice trembled slightly. She shouldn't know I'm here. We stood there in silence, waiting, barely breathing. After a moment, the knocking stopped, but the quiet that followed felt even worse. I could see how shaken he was, his hands trembling slightly. And though every part of me wanted to ask what was really going on, something about the fear in his eyes stopped me. The night stretched on, filled with tension and half-spoken truths. When he finally spoke again, his tone had changed, softer, but heavier. "You don't understand," he said. "She knows things about me. Things I wish I could forget." The look on his face told me there was more, something deeper than just a broken relationship. Something that might explain everything. And for the first time since he moved in, I started to wonder if I'd let someone into my life I didn't truly know at all. The next morning, the world outside was still soaked in rain. He hadn't slept much, neither had I. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind made both of us look toward the door, expecting another knock. But the silence that followed only made the tension worse. When I walked into the living room, he was already there, sitting on the couch, phone in hand, staring at a message. "She's not giving up," he said quietly. "She says she's coming back tonight." His voice was steady, but his eyes gave away the fear. I didn't know whether to be angry at him for hiding the truth or to feel sorry for the way he looked, cornered, exhausted, and guilty. "Why didn't you just tell me everything?" I asked. He hesitated for a long moment before finally saying, "Because she's not just someone I dated. She's my ex-fiancé." The word hit harder than I expected. Fiancé. Suddenly, everything made sense, the tension, the guilt, the way he'd looked at me like he was trying to forget something he couldn't. He went on, "I ended things when I found out she'd been lying to me. But she didn't take it well. She started showing up places, sending messages, calling my family. I thought if I disappeared for a while, she'd stop." I took a step closer. "And you thought staying here would help?" He looked up, eyes meeting mine. "It did, until I realized I wasn't hiding anymore. I was starting over." For a second, the air between us softened. It felt like something was finally breaking open, not in a destructive way, but in a way that let light in. But before I could say anything, his phone buzzed again. A new message appeared on the screen, "I'm outside." We both froze. He walked to the window and pulled the curtain back just an inch. A car was parked across the street, engine still running. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it drove away. Hours passed before we spoke again. The tension started to fade, replaced by a strange calm. He sat down beside me and said, almost in a whisper, "I think it's finally over." I wanted to believe him. For a moment, I did. But later that night, when I went to turn off the porch light, I noticed something tucked under the doormat, a small folded note with my name written on it. My hands trembled as I opened it. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. It said, "You don't really know who he is." My heart skipped a beat. The sound of his footsteps approached behind me, and for the first time, I didn't know whether to feel safe or afraid. He stood behind me as I read the note, his voice quiet and tense. "What does it say?" I hesitated before showing it to him. The color drained from his face. For a long time, he didn't speak, just stared at the words like they were pulling him back into something he thought he'd escaped. Finally, he said, "She's trying to make you doubt me." "That's what she does." But something about his tone made me wonder, was that really true? Or was there something more he wasn't ready to tell me? I didn't push him. Not that night. Instead, we sat on the couch until morning, watching the rain fade into sunlight. The silence was softer now, not heavy like before. Whatever the truth was, it felt like he wanted to face it instead of run from it. Days passed, and the strange calls stopped. No more messages. No more cars parked outside. Life slowly returned to normal, though normal didn't quite feel the same anymore. There were still moments of uncertainty, like when he'd go quiet during a conversation or look away when something reminded him of his past. But there was also something new, honesty. Little by little, he started sharing pieces of himself, the good and the broken. One night, as we sat together on the porch, he said softly, "Maybe that note was right. Maybe you don't really know everything about me. But I want to give you the chance to." It wasn't a grand declaration, but it was real. I smiled and said, "Then start from the beginning." That was the moment I realized some stories don't end with a clear answer, they just keep unfolding, quietly, in the spaces between trust and forgiveness. Now, when I think back to the night I told him to sleep on the couch, I understand that boundaries sometimes blur not because we're weak, but because we're human. We search for connection, even when it scares us.